So you're tackling credit card or other types of debt in 2026. Fantastic. Here is the easiest way to customize an automated debt payoff system that fits your life. First things first, you've probably heard about the snowball debt repayment method versus the avalanche debt repayment method. Each of them has their positives, right? The snowball method essentially says, take the smallest amount of debt, no matter what the interest rate is, and pay that off first, because you'll pay it off more quickly, and then you can tackle the next biggest amount of debt, pay that off, and continue all the way up to the biggest debt. The problem with that, at least the math nerds would tell you, is that that biggest amount of debt might be the biggest interest rate also. And if you push that back, you're going to be getting charged more interest on that while you're over there paying off the smaller debts and feeling good about yourself first in order to complete that strategy, right? Well, if you're somebody who is motivated by the payoff, then go ahead and do that particular strategy. Or if you're somebody who is more motivated by knowing that you are minimizing the amount of interest you're paying to the credit card companies, then fantastic, do that. Or do some combination of both. However, what I wanted to show you is how to actually use a debt repayment calculator to make this decision a little bit more conscious for yourself. So first steps first, we're going to go to Google and simply search for a debt repayment calculator. We can pull up the first one available. It will probably have some advertisements associated with it. And in fact, right here, we do see an advertiser disclosure. However, this looks like a great calculator overall. And as you'll see, this will allow us to start making some major headway in terms of being able to figure out, what does this actually mean for the amount that I'm going to be paying? Now, let's start with an extreme scenario just to give you the background on what credit card debt can do. Let's say that I have $10,000 of credit card debt, and that is on the high end of the interest spectrum at 29%. This is a common interest rate that you'll see on a lot of balance transfer deals. You know, those deals where you see 0% interest for the first X number of months, things like that. The thing that they don't tell you often, or at least that you have to dig into the fine details to understand about those deals, is if you do not pay off the entire balance in that introductory number of months, then you will be not only charged the 29% interest rate or whatever it is, it will be high, I can guarantee that, but you will probably also be back charged that percentage of interest for the amount of time that the promotion was in play if you didn't pay it all off, right? So that is one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at balance transfer deals. However, balance transfers can be a fantastic technique to use. Lots more to say on that. I offer free coaching through our not-for-profit community chartered organization. So please get in touch if I can expand further on that detail. However, again, I wanted to just show this example scenario here. $10,000 owed, 29% interest. Let's say that you're paying the minimum payment on that. Now, minimum payments tend to be in the range of about 2.5%. So that would be $250. Let's make it $260 because it's probably a little bit higher than that. And what we'll see is that if I'm making the minimum payment on this card at 29% interest, it is going to take me 112 months to pay this card off. And on the total $10,000 balance that I owe, I am going to pay $19,000 of interest. Goodness, that makes me mad at the credit card companies out there charging these insane interest rates. Now, that was a total example scenario. You're going to want to plug in your own numbers and see what the amount of interest owed is. My guess is that it is going to be far less than this because oftentimes what we'll see, actually, let's plug in 22% here, is the interest rate does make a massive difference. So 22% from 29, it goes from $19,000 of interest to only $7,000, right? So the interest rate plays a massive difference, and it only takes 68 months to pay this off. However, if we stick to 29% interest, again, a really common number for many of the cards out there or folks with less established or high credit scores, then it's likely that at that point, the credit card company is going to force a higher minimum payment on somebody. So a minimum payment may be closer to $300 or so, right? So still $10,000 above the amount of the balance that you owe being paid in interest in this scenario, but still a little bit more reasonable than that $19,000 that we saw with just the 260 minimum payment, right? The point here, though, is that when we decide on paying off our credit cards, what we're going to do is make above minimum payments. So let's say that my minimum payment is $300 and I go into my cash flow spreadsheet. Again, we have an example of one here that I'll give a more in-depth example with a little bit later on. And let's say that I figure out how I can add an extra $50 to my minimum payment. So I'm going to pay $350 instead of $300. This goes from $10,000 of interest and 69 months to pay this thing off to only 50 months and $7,000 of interest. If I can just add that $50 a month to this, that will change my financial life. Now, what would happen if instead of being $350, I'm able to increase my minimum payment by $100 a month? Now I'm paying almost half, $5,000 less interest than I was with that $300 minimum payment, and I'm done with this in 39 months. The beauty of that is that when I completely pay off this card at 39 months, that means I have $400 a month that is going back into my cash flow that I can redistribute, reallocate to where I want it to go. Now, that might be wanting it to go into my guilt-free percentage, but also probably I'm going to want to put a majority of that towards my monthly investment contributions or my monthly savings contributions to build up my long-term emergency reserve, because that is the difference. Having that reserve is the difference between going back into credit card debt when something inevitably happens in my life, my car breaks down or whatever, and not having to go back into that credit card debt. In fact, being paid an APY, an annual percentage yield in a high yield savings account for holding that emergency reserve for those times. So this makes a massive difference in somebody's life. I hope you can utilize a tool like this. Again, if we have a more reasonable interest rate on this scenario, we're going to see that the interest is much lower, a faster payoff as well. And if you were to utilize something like a fixed rate credit card, like the ones that we have at On Tap as of 12/22 of 2025, then we max ours out at, I believe it's 18%, maybe it's 19%. I'll have to look at it. And that interest rate is even that much better than what we were seeing even with that 22%. Now, I wanted to go into a little bit more of a scenario here. This is a lot more real for many people's lives. So what we see here is a cash flow spreadsheet for Evan and Eve. Now, this is a scenario, so I made these people up, although it is based off of some real life scenarios that I've incorporated into this one. So in this example scenario, Evan is a marketing specialist. He makes $75K. Eve is a teacher. She makes $50K. They're both salaried. There's lots going on in their lives, right? They both have cars. They make auto payments. They have a 3-year-old daughter. They can utilize grandparents for childcare sometimes, but they still pay for childcare sometimes. They have credit card debt of $8,000 at 22% interest. And they also have some student loans that they would like to pay off. So they're trying to figure out what their long-term strategy should be. So when we dive into their cash flow plan itself, what we see is what looks like a lot of numbers here, but really all it is Evan and Eve have gone into the partner columns here because they are in a partnership. They are married and are in this financial game together. And they've filled in their gross and net monthly incomes. And they've also filled in what they spend on all of their living expenses on a monthly basis. Now, there are a few quirks to this spreadsheet that I would highlight right here. One of them is that there is a miscellaneous section at the bottom of living expenses, which automatically adds 15% for things people forgot. If you are somebody who your numbers are dialed, then you are in the exception. You may be able to just delete that column altogether. I recommend for many people keeping it because they probably did forget some things when they were going and filling out this spreadsheet. However, I'm going to leave this as it is. And for right now, there's a couple of other things that we may want to adjust in order to create higher minimum payments on these debt payments. This credit card debt is shown right here at $200 a month on their $8,000 that they owe. So in this scenario, I'm just going to see what they are paying right now. They're paying $200 a month on the $8,000. So what we see is it's going to take them 73 months to pay this off. And their interest paid is $6,576 over that 73 months on an original balance of $8,000. So while it's certainly high, we can go in and figure out, hey, what could we do to pay this off more quickly and not have to pay so much interest back to these credit card companies? And what I'm going to suggest in Evan and Eve's case is actually something that folks may not recognize at first glance, which is that what I see here is that they're high on their living expenses. They're at 84%, where it's recommended that you get your living expenses to between 50 to 60% of take-home pay. But that can be something that we work towards over time. And instead, what I'm going to highlight is the fact that Evan, his individual living expense percentage is 74%, whereas Eve's is 99%. And the question is, why is that the case? Well, it looks like they are splitting 50-50, things like rent, utilities, even groceries down here. And so what if we were to have a discussion about, hey, what could we do if we split this up more proportionally to the income that we make? Where would it add flexibility in our cash flow plan, our spending on a monthly basis? And what we can see down here is if we scroll down to the guilt-free percentage, part of what's happening is that Evan basically controls all of the couple's guilt-free spending. They have $1,000 a month to spend on whatever they want, which is fantastic. But also, like, Eve probably has to ask Evan for any of those extra expenditures. And my guess is that this is building resentment between them. In this scenario, they have a 3-year-old daughter, and you know that that daughter is at an age where she can start to recognize patterns, even if they're not said patterns, about the way that her parents are using money in their lives. And she may come to take on some of those as well. So this is much bigger than just paying off debt. This is what type of money lessons are we going to pass on to the next generation? And so what we're going to see here is I'm going to suggest that they start having that conversation. And if they do decide that we can split things more proportionately, perhaps Evan starts paying $1,800 to Eve's $1,200. You can see their percentages coming a little bit closer together here. Let's say that he also does some of that with utilities. So they're still paying the same total amount, but Evan's just taking on a little bit more of the load. Let's say that they do that as well for their groceries. So same total amount, but Evan's taking on a little bit more. And we can see that their percentages are more closely aligned at this point. Their guilt-free number is still the same total, but it's more evenly split between them. And what they can now do is say, hey, what if we were to decrease the amount of guilt-free spending that we have every single month? We have $1,000. And in this scenario, these two are 28 years old. They may be able to take on a lower standard of living for now in order to do things like pay off their debt, start to increase their investment contributions and things like that, right? So in this case, let's say that they agree that each of them are going to pay extra. Evan's going to take a little bit more on extra, about $180 a month. And Eve is going to take on, let's say, $120 a month. I'm not sure if this will keep this actually puts their percentages at exactly even, which is pretty fantastic. It does increase their living expenses a little bit, but that is okay as a temporary measure to be able to pay off this debt. And what we notice now is that instead of paying the $200 a month, they're now going to be paying $300 a month. Instead of paying that $6,500-ish towards interest, they're only going to pay $3,000 over the life of this credit card. And instead of having that lengthy payoff period, they pay it off in 37 months. Again, going back to their original, we had 73 months to pay this thing off and over $6,500 of interest. So just that extra $100 a month from them working together more proportionally has changed the game for them. Well, what if they were to increase this even further? Let's say that they added an extra 50 in there. Now they're down to 30 months and only 2,400 of interest. Let's bring it up to 400. Can they get there? I don't know, but let's see. It's 26 months and only $2,129 in interest. Now, as you might have noticed, that amount of interest is going down less quickly now, right? So from the 350 number, we were paying 2,400 versus 2,100, and it's 30 months instead of being 26 months. So you cut off 4 months and about $300 of interest there. Is that worth it? Well, I don't know. Like, I might suggest that 350 feels like a nice balance here, because if we're at that 350 number, let's say that this is 200 and this is 150 here, and they're at the 350 total for their debt payoff. Well, let's see how much they still have in their guilt-free spending. They have $850 a month. So perhaps at that 350 level, Eve also says, you know what, I'm going to contribute that extra $50 into my savings to create that long-term emergency reserve, which could save us from going back into credit card debt. We still have $800 a month for guilt-free spending. You know what? Eve has a 3% match at work. And so what if she starts contributing $110 a month into that 401k, which means that because they're matching it, that's actually $220 a month going into the investment account. So now they're going to be paying this off in 30 months, about 2.5 years, and paying much less interest, but they're also contributing, they're building up a savings, and this amount of contributions, again, they're 28 years old, so let's just do a quick investment calculator to see what this adds up to. If they have $0 invested right now, her husband, Evan, was paying $155. Let's say he has a 401k match, so that's about $310 a month going into that. They're 28 years old, so they're going to go for 37 years at let's use an interest rate of 7%. And that lands them at having about $600,000 in their retirement account. Now let's add in that extra amount that Eve has now automated a contribution for, $110,000 into this amount. So $110 a month, not $110,000. $110 a month, well, they're matching it. So that's $220 a month that the company is helping to support. So that's $530 between both of them going into that investment account. Now, instead of having a $600,000 investment account at retirement age, they now have $1 million at age 65. And that was from a simple shift to their cash flow plan, changing around some of these percentages to make their investments be at 3.25% of their income rather than where it was. So again, this is the type of stuff that they can change throughout their lives. They can continue to bring living expenses down to create more guilt-free spending. Maybe they create a vacation fund, whatever it is that they want to do. But this is how they can use the numbers to re-engage in having these rich conversations about how do we want to use money to design the lives that we want to live. And the debt repayment step is one of the first critical pieces in that conversation. Hopefully this was a useful analysis for you. You can now go and do this on your own, probably within the next 5 minutes. But remember, when you have questions that come up, please feel free to reach out, contact us. We have a 15 for 15 link in the description where you can book a 15-minute meeting with us to get some introduction to the ways that we have positive financial conversations with you as a part of doing good work in our community as the not-for-profit community chartered organization that we are. We look forward to having that conversation with you. Have a great day, you all.